That's a lot of money. That's part of the reason why the owners are more than likely pushing for a lockout. Down to less than 2 weeks until the collective bargaining agreement runs out and negotiations are being held between the Players Association and the owners through a mediator. I guess that's good news, but, you know, something get done before the CBA expires. Let's bring in our capologist, J.I. Halsell. And I'll tell you one thing right now, J.I. You know, I've already said this. And my viewers know, I don't care, I'm a fan. But you know what, that's what you do. And there are some people out there that do care. Man, break this stuff down. It's kind of boring if you don't like it, but if you're a football fan, you may really want to know something about that.
I think you're right. The casual fan is not going to care about the revenues and the owners and the issues that the players have as it relates to the collective bargaining agreement. But at the end of the day, when it starts impacting whether or not there's going to be a 2011 season, that's when the casual fan's really going to start to, you know, take a certain notice or take interest in it.
Well, tell me this, Jay. What are they talking about? We've talked about it before. We've been dancing around it because we don't know. What are they talking about? Do you have to be an attorney to kind of understand it, or is it common sense? There are some things that are written. What are they?
At the end of the day, this is all about revenue. This is about the amount of money that the owners are getting. And from the owner's perspective, they feel like the revenues aren't at a point that allow for them to reinvest that money into the game to continue to grow the game even further. Whether or not that's true or not remains to be seen as the owners refuse to open up their books. But at the end of the day, this is about money. All
right, the players, what's their beef? I know they get 56% of whatever they get. That's a lot, you know. So what are they actually fighting? What are the players? What's their beef?
The players aren't fighting for anything. The players got a great deal in 2006. So the owners were the one who opted out of that 2006 agreement early because they felt like the revenues weren't where they needed to be.
So what do they want the players to do?
Play 2 additional games to grow the revenue pie. Because if at the end of the day you won't give us a bigger piece of the pie, the owners, in terms of taking some of that pie from the players, well, then let's make the pie bigger by making the players play 2 additional games. Okay, now if they play less than the 2 games, say preseason, in the 2 games that they're going to extra games they're going to play are going to count. Why is that such a bad deal? I don't know. Because if you're a player and your average career is 3 to 4 years with a 16-game season, you go to an 18-game season, you're talking about more wear and tear. Right. You know, how do you then adjust player contracts that have been contemplated on 16 games? How do you compensate the players for 2 additional games? And at the end of the day, it's not the players who want 2 additional games, it's the owners. So why didn't they think about that during the other preseasons when they had those new games that they played anyway? Because I know starters weren't playing and all that, but they still were playing 2 extra games. Because at the end of the day, the 2 additional games is about generating more revenue. Okay. And so, you know, it's about money. Everything at the end of the day with the CBA negotiation goes back to money. Money. Absolutely. All right, now, since you know all about the CBA and stuff like that, that's all over the world. Look at Wisconsin, man. They got people in the streets. So is it about union busting even in pro football? To a certain extent. I think that, you know, in order to get their way in terms of the owners and what they're looking for, if it means breaking the union, meaning causing the union and their constituents, the players, to, you know, kind of look at their leadership and say, look, you guys got to get a deal done because we're not getting paychecks and we got to get the bills paid. You know, unfortunately, a lot of these professional athletes live paycheck to paycheck. And when those paychecks stop coming in, they're going to start looking towards their leadership to do a deal, even if that deal may not be in their best interest. But the salaries and all are doing pretty good in the NFL for players, right? Absolutely. That's part of the problem, though, from the owner perspective, is particularly when you look at those top 10 picks in the first round and how much money those guys get paid, $50 million guaranteed for Sam Bradford. You know, they're saying that cannot continue and be maintained without adversely impacting the business of the game. So they've got to reel that in. And some of that might be, you know, a salary cap that does not grow as much as it has, you know, historically. We'll see. Is that ownership's fault? Not necessarily. Ownership are the ones who have agreed to these deals. You know, you don't have to sign the contract. You don't have to sign Sam Bradford to a $50 million guarantee. But that's the way the market has gone, and that's the deal that those guys have signed. So now they're looking to get some, you know, give back from their 2006 deal.
Well, how come they couldn't sign a guy for whatever they want, regardless of the market value?
In theory, they could, but that player that player wouldn't sign a contract. That player would just say, "Well, look, I'll sit out. I'll, you know,
even though
I'll re-enter the draft." Okay. You know, $50 million, if that's the market value. If you feel, you know, as a sportscaster, you're worth a certain amount of money, and a potential, you know, network says we're going to give you half price,
you can negotiate that.
You're not going to probably take that job. So everybody has a market value.
Right. All right. We'll talk about one thing that I know the people, you know, when you have a franchise player, what does that mean? I know some people saying, what does that mean? Some people know, some people don't know. Your calls, if you want to know, 703-387-1020, plus what about the Redskins? How will the possible lockout affect their free agency plans or trades, whatever? We'll be back, okay? But I do know this is a thing that's been pushed in my mind for a long time, okay? Right here on News Channel 8, we'll be back. I'm Glenn with my main man, J.I. Nobody broke in that crew, I can tell you that right now. Hainsworth's contract, all that cash, we're back with our capologist, J.I. Halsell. And, you know, it's really confusing. What is a franchise player is what? Like Michael Vick. What kind of money is he going to be making? I know he ain't going to hassle about nothing, that's for sure. But what kind of money is he going to make for that year being a franchise player?
The franchise tag for a quarterback is $17+ million
for that year.
For 1 year, guaranteed. Ooh, now, because Peyton Manning, as an example, made in excess of $17 million, his franchise tag number is 120% of what he made last year, which in his case is $23 million guaranteed for 1 year.
Well, why do guys try to get out of being franchise players?
Because you want to hit the open market. You want that multi-year.
I was just throwing it.
You want that multi-year deal that's going to give you that $40 million guarantee that Albert Hainsworth got. Now, who's a guy who actually played under the franchise tag for at least 1 year in Tennessee? He did his 1 year under the franchise tag and got $40 million guaranteed to come here to Washington.
And had a good year when he did it. I mean, you know,
well, there's a lot of motivation. Players, anytime they're in their final contract year and they're looking at free agency that next offseason, it's a lot of motivation to play well.
All right, I've talked to a lot of pros. Let's get to a couple calls. Charles, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, Glenn, how you doing?
Good, man.
I wanted to ask you a question. Do you think that by what's going on with this lockout will begin to teach these, especially African-American athletes, to manage their money better? Because it was a guy that was at the LA NBA All-Star, NFL ball player, who had $100,000 tab at the bar. And then you mentioned a couple weeks ago about Gilbert Arenas, how he's just throwing money away. I mean, these guys got to really understand the value of that money. It's not to be just misused and abused. Because, I mean, $100,000 at a bar tab, I mean, you can really help some people with that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, these guys seem like, they don't have that, or not being taught the value of that money, along with, when you mentioned Sam Bradford, but you don't hear about them being in the clubs, making it rain, throwing money away like,
Charles,
it falls off trees.
Charles, they make it rain, too. They're at clubs, too. It's not only brothers that go to clubs. The other guys go to clubs too. Sometimes they go together. You know that, Jay. I mean, they do. And you don't hear about a lot of it, but a lot of guys, when they do crazy things, if you get arrested, somebody gonna hear about it.
Yeah, Charles is talking about Bryant McKinney, the offensive tackle in Minnesota. LA, All-Star Weekend, dropped $100,000 in the club, and he's kind of the poster child for what the union does not want their players to do in advance of a lockout. Over the past year, the union has been encouraging their players to save money, because once the lockout occurs, you're not going to have those paychecks coming in. So you're going to have money to sustain yourself. And I suspect that, unfortunately, not a lot of players have done that. And so when it comes down to those paychecks stop coming in, they're gonna force their leadership to take a bad deal.
A $100,000 bar tab. I'm sure he's helped some people, but good gracious. I mean, it's his money, man. I mean, if he wants to waste it, he can waste it. But and how much do we know that he has so he can waste $100 grand? Don't know. Final thoughts in just a moment. Let's take a look back into our archives. Let's go back to the state. 1985, when the General Bobby Knight went on a tirade, did it on national TV. Indiana playing Purdue. After 3 quick fouls on 3 Hoosier players, Knight took his frustration out on a chair. Well, that was a long time ago. And his basketball court, watch him slide the chair across the court. He got teed up on the court. He got thrown out of the game. Let's see if we can see this here. What are you saying, Bobby?